this far into goddamn electric school while still having boomer moments.
It's so hard to be technologically inept with the virtual school.
Yeah, no, I feel that. You figured out how to get the blurry background going though. I don't know how to do that.
Oh, people have different, they take screenshots. I guess I could change it up each time.
No, I feel like the blurry background is like the most professional of
It
all
is.
the options.
It definitely is if you're going for like professionality, if that's a word.
Yeah.
But if I don't like, I was like, okay, if I am on an interview and I get that, that's not great, But if I'm just in class, maybe I just need something like
Need to feel like you're on spring break.
yeah. But like also I like my plant here. It's just so large.
It is,
like
yeah. It's also like well placed where it's like there's two people in the frame here. It's like you and your plant are two separate characters.
Yeah. And it's also good because if I'm like sitting like this and I forget to close my bathroom door, you don't see the toilet, or I just nervously like have to sit like this.
What's up?
Nothing.
Are you still working on all this bear stuff?
I'm still working on the bears, and we'll be working on the bears and people throughout the semester. Bears and people is the short name for a longer story that I started in March of, I guess, 2021, when a woman, a resident from Jackson,
that story. Yeah.
illegally fed a bear, sorry. And it was supposedly, $3.99, but claimed that she was feeding moose. So it went to the federal court, and it was challenging to find to reprimand her because moose fall under state and bear fall under federal. And I kind of dug in deeper to this case to find out that sometimes these wildlife feeding laws can actually be purposely like watered down to try to get them passed. To help appease like greater state interests. So like, how can we have really strict wildlife feeding laws when wildlife baiting is still legal in Wyoming, and when agencies like Wyoming Game and Fish actually artificially feed the elk on the elk refuge. So that's
wait. Can you? I feel like before Zoom, I was like looking up this fucking story about this woman again. Can you just like paint the picture of what this woman was doing? Because I think I was out there when this whole thing started, and then it seemed like completely psychotic. And then I don't really know where it ended, other than I feel like I saw headlines that were like, she's not being prosecuted. So yeah. Also, wait, I actually didn't know this, that moose are property of the state and bears are property of the federal government.
The moose is not under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So,
Word.
So what they claim that she's feeding will reflect how she gets persecuted in court.
Yeah.
So if they say that she was feeding the bear, but she claims that it was only accidentally fed by her feeding the moose, which is still illegal, it technically does not conflict or break any laws under the Federal Endangered Species Act.
Word.
So that's where
but it's still illegal to feed a moose. It's just not federal. It's not a federal crime. Okay.
So that's the realization I had when I was interviewing people in Jackson Hole, Wyoming this summer. I was like, wait, like it's still illegal, whatever she's doing. And they're like, yeah, but you have to have the right, like, you know, persecution. Like you have to say, oh, you know, what are we going to, you know, persecute her for in court? Like, are we going to call her out for the moose? Or are we going to call her out for the bear? And they went for the bear in the federal court. And then her like fallback was like, oh no, I was accidentally feeding the bear. I was really feeding the moose. Even though it's still illegal, you would think that would still fall through. But these are kind of like the roundabouts of these feeding laws.
That's kind of interesting. So she probably can't be like, she can't be like prosecuted again then, right? Like they went for the bear route, the like federal crime route, and then like she's just not going to get in trouble for the moose then, because they went the bear route. They were like, we're going to go for you after the bear feeding, and then okay, you're still breaking state laws, but now because we tried to prosecute you about bears, we can't double attack you.
Right. And then I kind of like dug a little deeper into this case, and I was like, well, what like are the county laws for wildlife feeding? Like what are the policies? Like if you suspect that someone is feeding a wildlife, or you suspect like your neighbor's doing it, like what's the process? So I spoke to some county staff of Teton County, and they brought me through the whole process. I actually spoke to the person that goes and checks on these properties. And this person's actually like the same within like the planning board or commission, or like does other things like the like kind of like county planning regulations. So it's not just like a job that's cut out for them. Like they have other responsibilities, which is like a ton on their list to do, where I feel like wildlife is so prevalent in Teton County that it could be its own position. But it's kind of just like thrown on the plate of someone that already has a ton of responsibilities, like not planning, sorry, coding. Like does that follow the code? The planning commission is different than the county staff. So I was like talking to him, and I was like, so like what would you do if like you suspected like this woman, like what did you have to do? And he was like, we would have to get photographic evidence, and I can't go onto her property, I can't go onto private property. And I was like, oh, okay, so you have to get the animal like feeding on her property in the moment. I was like, okay, so he has to be there at the right time in the right place. All right.
Is this like they're like kind of like FBI like fucking staking out this woman's house and like waiting for, like, are they? I don't understand how they caught this woman feeding a bear on her own property, because from the pictures I've seen, it's like literally she's on her back porch with
like I think she's doing it enough where it was probably obvious, but like the point I'm like trying to get across is that even though with someone that was doing it so regularly and so obviously, they still couldn't get the right evidence, because he was telling me that even if you get a photograph where like you have a bear's face within a bucket, you can say that the bear is drinking water.
Sick. Okay.
So like, and then like the other thing is like, if it's accidentally like left out, that's an accident as opposed to purpose. So it's like, how do you you can't catch that in photographic evidence. You can't. So, but
unless you're literally like doing weird fucking like FBI sort of thing where you're like in her backyard and shit, and like with a telescope or something, you know?
Yeah.
Did they do that?
No, I think he can't go onto private property. So he would have to like take these photos from the street or something. But normally they get like letters from neighbors and say, I think my neighbor is doing this. And then they usually send out a warning and then another warning. And then like to even progress to the next stage, they have to get these photographs for evidence. Yeah. But I think U.S. Fish and Wildlife did intervene on this one, or some staff that were in the area, and they did like visit her several times. And from what I've heard, it was like, oh yeah, it was like clear, obvious that she was doing this. And she like straight up said like, you know, she's like, yeah, I like seeing them. I like when they come around. Like, yeah, like she's very nonchalant about it.
Okay, wait, can I ask a question this is like a rumor that I've heard?
Yes.
And then I kind of want to get bigger picture with this.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I feel like I've heard that she was like super into moose. Like she was like petting the moose. Or she was actively trying to feed the moose because she was like really into moose and creatures and was like petting them and like picking bugs off of them. Is that at all like remotely true?
So I don't know those like the exact details, but I do know like from the interviews I've had, people were saying that she was very emotionally connected towards these animals. Like yes, what you were saying, it sounded similar. Like she wanted to get close to, I don't know, to pet them, but very close to them, especially with 399 and her cubs.
399 being a famous grizzly bear.
Yeah, and having her and her 4 almost fully grown cubs like there, you would think it's problematic because it is. A fed bear is a dead bear because once they become habituated to feeding in one location, they're going to seek out other locations like resident homes downtown, which gets them into trouble. And then their options are euthanization or relocation, and relocation doesn't really work as they go back to that area. So that's why they said fed bear is a dead bear. So it's interesting, these people that want to get so intimate and close with these animals could actually be the reason why an animal is killed. And if 399 was ever killed, I think it would be a huge upheaval and conflict. She's seen as like a major, not just like a famous grizzly bear, the most famous grizzly bear in the world, I guess.
Can you like tell the story of 399? It's like a big deal, right? It's like
yes,
like there's Facebook groups and like celebrity. She's like kind of a celebrity bear.
She has like so many Instagram followers. She has her own Instagram, her Facebook page, Twitter page. She's just I guess what happens is that in these bear towns, and Jackson's not the only one, is that people will find a bear that's usually like tagged or named. So this bear is tagged under the 399th bear that was tagged in the Grand Teton area. And they become charismatic over time if, you know, people see her regularly. And her home range is kind of in the southern part of Grand Teton National Park. So people do see her and she tends to go near the roads. But what makes her kind of amazing is that she is an older bear and you know, like in her late 20s, and she's mothered all these cubs, but half of them have died from human wildlife conflict. And it's very rare to.
By that, do you mean that they've been euthanized? Like her bears have become too comfortable around humans and then they're executed?
Yeah, like one was hit by a car. And what you were saying, some get into food, people that leave food out. And yeah, they will be euthanized or relocated. That's kind of the reactive management strategies that are in place now for these bears. I think it's becoming more and more common as there are more bears and also there's more people in the area. And right now, maybe she's reached her height of celebrityhood as she came out of the den a few years back with 4 cubs. And that's kind of amazing that she has 4 cubs, and she's also raised them to the next year. That's usually cubs don't that many cubs don't survive to the next year. Maybe a mother bear is more successful raising one, maybe two cubs. But so she's obviously a very successful mother. And I think that also what people may not realize is we like to hang on to charismatic megafauna that kind of reflect us. So if she shows motherly qualities, we're kind of seeing ourselves in that animal, which is why I think we also like tend to like more intelligent species like elephants and whales, species that are very connected to their young. We kind of see ourselves in that, and maybe we want to even save them, preserve them, care about them even more than say like a lizard or a bug or something. And I think we forget that we have that connection to animals, that we have that reflection of ourselves in them, and that these are major influences that are maybe not be taken into consideration in like very scientific, technical wildlife management, but they do play a major role in people's emotions and connections and expectations towards like the management of these species. So not just 399, but grizzlies in general they're a huge symbol for like the American West and wilderness. So I think those considerations should be kept in mind when we're managing such charismatic species.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I feel like I was always like, when I was living out in Wyoming, I always felt like a little distant from that whole world in a weird way, because I feel like I was kind of in the recreation lifestyle space, which I think most people just literally do not give a shit about grizzly bears in, even if whatever Jeremy Jones says he's into the environment, I just don't buy it. But the whole like wildlife photography world feels very invested in this kind of stuff, and like, yeah, it was just always quite shocking when I was like, oh, I'm gonna go climb something in Grand Teton National Park, and show up and it's like literally 300 people with their cameras on the side of the road, taking pictures of like 399 or whoever, just whatever the hell bear is there. Could be a grizzly, could be a black bear. And it just feels like a weird like balance of like, these people clearly are like worshiping these bears. It like, they are like sacred creatures, and the way that they're doing that is like taking tons of photos and like sharing them to Facebook, and like that's like, it just feels like an almost like unmanageable situation in my mind, because it's like, these people do love these bears, and they like happens with a lot of things, like are loving them to death in a certain way, in that like we just, to my not, I mean, my understanding is that relocating bears doesn't work, and they basically just like end up being executed when they become too comfortable around humans generally. And I don't know who's to blame for that. Like how do you manage a situation where like the thing that needs to be managed is this like it might be dishonest to say this, but like one dimension of it is like this like kind of worshiping of the bears, that like they're just so meaningful to people, and I can't tell if that's a good or bad thing. Like, do the people who really love 399 like participate heavily in like management stuff, or are they just like consuming the bear, like using her as a way to be into motherhood or whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those are some great questions you've raised. I mean, I think the people that really care about 399 actually wish they were more involved on the management side. And I know they really try to reach out to agency personnel and give them their opinions on how 399 and other bears should be managed, because they're so emotionally invested. I also think that it could be more than just like what you were saying, like worshiping this bear, because people that follow the bear, that post photos about bears in general and 399, I think they see it as a very good, morally driven purpose to promote awareness of these species. And so there's always, I don't see it as strictly good or bad. I think there are good and bad both intertwined. So like I think that promoting awareness of the species is probably a good thing, and maybe pointing out that, you know, we are overcrowding this species. But where I see good and bad actually hurting this like labeling of what is good and what is bad in this situation is when people can't see past that they're also part of the problem. Like you were saying, who's at fault here? I think we all are as a human species, that the reason why we're having these conflicts is because we are overcrowding in this area. We're dealing with a species that needs a large home range, and we're used to developing in this area and residing in this area when, you know, back when Yellowstone had a few hundred bears, and now they're reaching back to their original population numbers. So it's like all kind of new situations that we're dealing with more people. And I don't think anyone is better than anyone else in this situation. And once people start taking ownership that they're part of the problem and becoming more vulnerable in that position, that opens up the conversation, instead of saying, you know, like these people are bad because they're doing this. And to say that we're all part of the problem, it's just, I think it's just more of a productive conversation. Like, okay, we're all contributing to this. What are we going to do about it? Rather than pointing fingers on who's to blame. I also think there's like implications to posting photos of bears. And I think photographers are like, they know their influence now. Like I said, these are like kind of new situations that we haven't really dealt with before as bear populations are rising. That and also with social media too, this wasn't always like such a strong aspect in you know, celebrityhood and stuff like that. That
do you see it as celebrityhood? It's like, I feel like most people who, I literally have no idea who will listen to this, but like I think most people might hear that as like a metaphor, but it feels like it is the same thing almost as like Hollywood celebrity. It's like this.
I mean, it's a famous, it's like Cecil the Lion. That's what I would like compare. When I was first starting this project out, I would say like, oh, do you know Cecil the Lion? And everyone's like, yes. And I was like, yeah, do you know how emotional everyone got when Cecil the Lion died? Like, it was a celebrity animal. And I think that is great for like intervention analysis when a huge event occurs like that, or when there's a you know, someone that's famous or something that's famous. It actually, you're able to see people's values and emotions and connections more to the situation, as opposed if you know, something didn't happen, if the Cecil Lion was still alive today. So I think that's what we're seeing play out with 399, is that it's contentious. People are very emotional about it. But yeah, I was saying that photographers know their influence, and I think they've adjusted their actions too. Like in their posts, they'll say, please do not follow this bear. And I know agencies have said, you know, like when people are driving on the road and they see your long photographic lenses, like they're going to stop. Like people may not even notice the bear on the road, but when they see your huge lenses, and you may be drawing crowds, which could, you know, end in a conflict where a bear charges a person near a car, or overcrowd the bear, or, you know, there's 200 cars on a highway pass that's really not safe for people to congregate. And then we get into the debate of, you know, I think it's my right to see the bear along the road, or the bear should be like, has the right to be on the road and be where they want to be. But again, that relates back to, we are the problem. Like the problem, we need to look at the bigger picture here, that we have a highway going through bear habitat. So yes, it's the bear's right to be there, but we have to deal with what we're given here, the landscape that we've designed ourselves, and how do we manage that more appropriately for the safety of people and bears as well.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a funny conundrum that plays out in the environmental world quite often, but is like not really familiar to outside of the environmental world, which is this like just classic conundrum of stuff being awesome out there and wanting to promote it because it's awesome, and in doing so destroying the thing, which is like, I guess that's like, I don't know, I would imagine like that happens in cities with like cool bars or some shit like that, where it's like, oh, this place is like so sick and no one knows about it, or like bands where it's like, oh, this band's like so sick, I'm like not going to tell anyone about it. Then you like tell people about the bar or whatever that's really awesome, and then everyone goes there, and then it's not cool anymore. But in the environmental context, it's like we're literally killing the thing. It's like the classic loving the national parks to death, or worshiping 399 to death, which is like crazy.
I think that is something we're going to be running into more and more in America, because I'm finding that, when we put up a national park in, another country, it's an extension of colonialism, where everyone was pushed out of that piece of land, where when we put up a national park in the States, it's like, come and enjoy it for your, this is in your enjoyment. Like, I think the mission statement for the Park Service is to preserve the integrity of the parks for natural resources and the enjoyment of people. And those are actually two conflicting interests right now. I'm not saying they always have been, or they always will be, but right now, the way that they're being managed, where infrastructure can't handle the influx of visitors, it is a conflict. So it's interesting that we're kind of in the system of like, we are loving these places to death, loving the animals to death. How do we give everything space? And probably the biggest amount of respect you can give to these animals is like, just let it be, which is so hard. We want to see it. And like, how can you deprive someone that's never seen a bear of seeing a bear? That person could be inspired and grow up to be like a conservationist. I know that's one argument. So these are the things we have to start grappling with. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for integrating morals, perspectives, values into conservation, which has been based in the technocratic sciences. But this plays such a huge role in the way we think about these situations. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, what I'm interested in, and what I'm also very convinced by through the interviews and the people I've seen, the places I've been around this case.
What do you think, like in this particular case, like people care about grizzly bears a lot, even like in Manhattan, or like people have opinions, people don't have opinions about like how like the water's undrinkable in like a lot of creeks in Wyoming. Or that like the biggest coal mines in the world are in Wyoming. People don't even know that typically. But like, I don't know, rando in like Connecticut probably has some opinion about grizzly bears. That feels like this presents this unique situation where like, it seems like people are going to want something to happen to feel like we're doing something, as this like these sorts of conflicts continue to emerge. And like, sure, this woman feeding a celebrity grizzly bear is like a particularly insane moment a little bit in this like ongoing thing. But like, grizzly bears have always been a big, almost like battleground that like implicate everyone a little bit just because they're so goddamn charismatic. And it seems like there's just a lot of problems, like you were saying, like we've just made these infrastructural decisions in the past, like I feel like this is a bigger problem than just grizzly bears. Actually, like throughout the 20th century, we just made a ton of infrastructural decisions about like where interstates should go and where roads should go and where we should build cities. And like we know now that there were bad decisions, but like we can't go back, sort of. And like I don't know, this is not about 399 exactly, but it's like a grizzly bear problem that I don't know how familiar you are with, but like I-90 just like cuts the grizzly bear migration corridor off in the Rockies, and like they can't cross I-90 as it goes through Montana, and it's like a huge problem. Like what do we do? We just do we dig a hole through the Rockies and like make I-90 go underneath all the mountains, or like what can we do other than be like don't tag 399 in this Instagram post, or like or we just fuck.
No, those are great points. I mean, through this whole work, I've realized that this is much greater than 399. 399, that's a great starting point, and it makes these really big themes, these problems, more tangible and applied when we can apply it to a certain thing, especially when it's a thing that we are very emotionally connected to. Mm-hmm. But in my work, I was also asking like, well, what about the water? Like, that's contaminated, and do we have a water specialist for the town? And so this is all connected. I wasn't just like talking about the bear and the single bear, but it is certainly like a great starting point because a lot of people there and a lot of people around the world know about her. But you're right that it relates to all these other bigger issues that we have to start grappling with as a society. And then back to your point about, the rando in Connecticut that's leaving a comment. They're furious about, having bears being hazed, which is when wildlife agencies come in and they remove a bear from non-lethally remove a bear from a road using like rubber bullets or firecrackers, and people see that and they're like, how could you harm this bear? And even though they don't really get that harmed, but they are being displaced, and so people, I think, should realize that when they're making these comments or assumptions, and on the surface, it looks like, oh my gosh, they're shooting this mother bear and she has the right to be there. Well, you have to realize that these agencies are kind of dealing with new territory in terms of like, some of these bears have never been in these areas or left the parks when they had smaller populations. Also, the complexity of there's 9 jurisdictional organizations that have to collaborate. We have Wyoming Department of Transportation, the Forest Service, the Park Service, because the bears are under the Endangered Species Act, Wyoming Fish and Game, because normally this would fall to them if the bear wasn't protected under the Endangered Species Act. And then we have like bear brigades, and it goes on and on and on.
Wait, can I just put a plug out for like, I think this is a thing that people who don't spend time in the West don't understand. That like there are so many state and federal jurisdictions just like fighting for power over every decision all the time. It's a fucking debacle.
Well, also it's not only just fighting for power, but I could see maybe someone saying, oh, should you take this on? Should you take this on? Because now 399 is such a big deal that whoever makes a decision about her, and that normally falls under U.S. Fish and Wildlife, like they are now put as a target of like, who made this decision? Like, oh my gosh, like, like that person may be, like really like targeted by people that really care about the situation, and they're angry, and they have right to be angry because we're dealing with a system that can't really handle these complexities of both the social, political, ecological, economic aspects of these animals. I mean, we're using like data driven population counts to like manage these bears, and even though that's a very important aspect, people's connections and emotions play such a large part that there needs to be a little more social science integration into that. And I do think that the people that work for agencies, if you talk to them, they're like, oh yeah, like, I studied wildlife biology. Like, of course they don't hate animals, they love animals. I don't think anyone that would go into wildlife biology like hates animals. They're not animal haters. But then they realize that actually like 90% of their job is dealing with people. But we're not, as a trained conservationist, ecologist, wildlife biologist, I was certainly not trained in any way or form to manage human behavior and expectations. So that can be very overwhelming, and like how to truly integrate people's opinions, desires, expectations, wants into the management, because I don't think that can happen when we just say, oh yeah, we have stakeholder engagement because we had a public meeting where people raised their hands and we wrote down their thoughts on paper. Like, it's that's different than like truly integrating. And integration is an overused word in conservation, but truly integrating into the system. And
but it's like such a tough thing when like you were saying, like a bear in one day can be on private land and then federal, let's say national park land, and then federal national forest land, and then back on private land again, and then maybe on like a Wyoming state land.
Wyoming dot highway.
Sure, yeah, like on the fucking highway. And then it's like each of those like agencies legally has different goals. Like, and like I think about some other conflicts I've followed in the West with animals, and it's like, say in national parks, where even wildlife biologists are like, we think we should be managing these things in this way, but legally we have to manage for highest populations of this other thing in this way because this animal's labeled as endangered. And if it's endangered, then like we have to do this because it's just like legal shit. It's like bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Like, so people are like tied in that way too, where it's like, no, you actually just, if you're a Park Service employee, you have to like follow the rules, even if you think it's like a military shit.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes what we ask of agency personnel, they still have to operate within a system with guidelines and rules. And this system's been around for as long as when these organizations were developed to just preserve these species for hunting and game, like purposes. Yeah. And that's still largely a big purpose of game and fish organizations. And it's challenging to maybe take that system and transition to a more holistic habitat approach than just like game species focused. And so we have to be like mindful of what we're asking people and what limitations they have. And if this is just a technical problem where like we're just using hazing and wildlife, highway passes to solve this, or is it something much deeper and institutional, like an institutional problem, something that's embedded in the institution and the systems and the way these institutions were developed? And what we're asking of people, is it more of a technocratic, like simple solution, or is it like a major change? And can that person even do that single-handedly? Are we even aware of these different types of problems? Because an institutional problem is going to take generations to change.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people's frustrations are also stemming from, is like, it's time for change. Do these institutions have the capacity for that? I mean, do they have the capacity to manage these species, not just for game purposes, but actually for like the public good of people, of citizens? Because you could say, that person in Connecticut doesn't have any right to the situation. And that's a whole nother thing, is like, where do we say, okay, these people are going to be involved, but these people can't? But actually, everyone has the right to wildlife, I believe.
Well, yeah, and also bears specifically that are under the Endangered Species Act and are federal. And like that means that, you know, US citizens in Louisiana or Manhattan should be a part of the conversation if it's under federal jurisdiction. I mean,
and it's not an easy task, because how are you going to credit someone's opinion that lives all the way on like the East Coast, you know, and's never seen a bear and doesn't know about all these jurisdictional complexities or even how the landscape works, versus someone that's gone and to get degrees for this and been hired for this position. And so obviously there's different levels of participation and consideration, but right now I'm seeing the only ones that are credible in having a say right off the bat are like those that have maybe like PhDs in tracking a puma or something, you know? And so like, that's great.
Wait, do you think that those people should be credible? Or wait, are you saying that those are the only people you see participating in how the decision around bears? Or you think that that's how it should work, that only people with PhDs about puma tracking should have legitimate opinions about grizzly bears?
I don't think the people who have PhDs in puma tracking should be the only ones. I think this relates back to this is a great example of an institutional problem. This goes back to like what our academic systems are designed to teach people in this field is like, if you get a PhD in puma tracking, like not, you know, like you're probably not going to learn about the psychology or the sociology of the human mind and how that plays out in conservation. It's just like not really mainstream. I mean, if you look at how our institutions are designed, you go for a master's of environmental science and you're on a research track and you're studying this one case and you're going to submit your thesis, and this really just needs to be able to, for people that are in the field, experts in the field, to read. And like that's kind of the system and I do have hope that there'll be more programs that are true socio-ecological integration and not just something that's written on a university's website of like, we're really interdisciplinary. I'm not even sure if any of us really know what that truly looks like, because I don't think that's really happening right now. And so when we talk about the bears and people thing and 399, it's all related to this greater picture. But 399 just helps us ground it. But we're all talking about these problems that go with academics and our society and the way that we've designed our infrastructure and just greater things at hand that I think need to all be in our mind when considering these issues, but not forget to don't get too overwhelmed. How do we work through these complexities, not get overwhelmed? Like these are huge issues.
Wait, so is the greater picture like the system that recruits people to be in positions of power to make decisions about bears, aka like go get your master's in whatever and then get your PhD in puma tracking, and now you're like a Forest Service employee in Wyoming or whatever, like that's big picture fucked, sort of like actually you shouldn't just like do all these technical like scientific things and then be put in a political position where you're like managing people's expectations, not managing wildlife. Like, is that the big picture problem that you're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it even goes farther than the people in these very politically influenced positions as well in wildlife agencies, because again, like you were saying, they have to operate under federal laws, state laws. There's other influences than just collecting ecological data or being a really good field technician or, stuff like that. So I think it also goes to wildlife biologists and scientists in general. When I've spoke to biologists that have studied bears for 30, 40 years, I was like, so you've studied bears your whole life. What's the future of bears? What are you going to do? And I had a person say, well, politics get in the way. So, I can't really do anything. And to me, that's just like, we should be trained or have the education or have the awareness to know that our work doesn't just end with writing a scientific paper and getting it published. We have to understand how our work, the data, is going to be impacted by politics. And we should be writing our papers more in that light than just saying, I collected this field trap, this camera trap, and this is how many existed here. Like, that's still important, but at the end of the day, these decisions about this data that you've collected are going to be decided upon in a political environment. So we should also be aware of that as well.
Wait, can I take a really cynical angle on that what you just said? Because I'm like, I don't have patience for that perspective anymore, basically at all. Because one way to read a, say, scientist with a PhD who does research about bears and then says politics get in the way of managing bears, the sort of like way, well, one way you could hear that is to hear it as, I think I hate democracy, and I think that the world would be better if we lived in an authoritarian state where people with more credibility can just make decisions without the input of everybody else and not have to like be accountable to anything. I'm like, I just want a technocratic fascist state, which is not what, like, if I said that to like a wildlife biologist in Wyoming, they'd be like, well, no, that's not what I mean. But it is sort of saying that. It's saying like, I actually don't want to be a part of society. I just want to do my little expert thing and be in power to like make decisions based on that. And it's just bullshit. It's like, I don't know. I'm like, grow up. Like, sorry, that's not how the world works, bud. Like, move to North Korea. You want a fucking authoritarian state? Like, don't live in the U.S.
Exactly. And I think that's plays into when people say, like, if people just followed the science, we wouldn't be in a lot of these situations that we're facing now, like not just with bears, but also the pandemic, which is why I think this bear case is also very applicable to other aspects of our society. It's like, no, that's not true. Like, also science, I know I hate to burst your bubble, but that's heavily biased as well. That's just one truth. And we can't separate politics and our biases from a method that was developed by humans, because we are inherently biased. It's like the argument of like, is everything subjective or is science objective? And I think I'm in the camp where everything is subjective. When we go out and we choose what to research or we choose how to research it, those are biases. And so I think science is a tool to get to this so-called truth, but it's not necessarily the truth. And I know that also has its own implications, because if people are like, well, if science is not true, oh my God, there's fake news. What do we believe? Oh my gosh. But I think there's a balance between that, like if if a lot of the scientists are saying that we are, changing the climate from our impacts, and it's it's something we've collected over time, and it's kind of a known thing in all parts of the world now. I feel like, I mean, that's probably not something we can deny. So there's I'm saying this with a balance, there's a spectrum to this. Go
ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say to your point that, like, people that say, we have the facts, we have the data, this is the truth, that's way to the other side of it. We need to see that this is just a tool that helps us to kind of figure out what's going on, but we still don't really know maybe what's totally going on. We have a picture of how many bears are on the landscape, but it doesn't mean we know every single bear that's on the landscape or how many are actually missing.
No, totally. I think it's like it in the big picture thing you're just talking about. It's like for a long time, people just understood science as this thing that produced objective facts about the world. And like in my lifetime, I was born in 91, like, which was a year after Exxon started to deny climate change. After like having evidence of climate change for 2 decades. Like I've just lived my whole life in this situation of like, yeah, science is contestable. And like I think the thing that you were saying is like, to say that science is not just producing truth, it's producing a perspective on the world, isn't to say everyone's perspective is equal. Like, sorry, bud, from, I don't know, down my neighbor here down the street, like, whether you believe in climate, like, whether you trust climate science, like, you don't have any good evidence to refute climate science. Sorry. There's not good evidence that there really is not good evidence that climate change is not happening. And so it's like, at a certain point, it's like whose subjectivity is best about these certain things. And a lot of times science's subjectivity is pretty good compared to whoever's making a random claim about like whatever. But the other thing is like, are scientists good policymakers? Which is another problem. And it's like oftentimes not, which seems like both in the environmental world and the whatever vaccine world, let's say now, it's like,
right,
the science can say a bunch of things, but like I think scientists have just kind of defaulted on their like responsibility to maintain trust with the public, you know. And a lot of that's because they've just been, I get my PhD in puma tracking and now I'm a politician that runs a Forest Service thing. And it's like, you weren't trained for this shit. What the fuck are you doing there? You know, you're just bad at it. And then you lose trust because you're bad at being a politician. Yeah, I don't know. It's like weird. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. I think scientists need to get their shit together a little bit for real.
It's definitely like it's a large task, no doubt. But I mean, also being a doctor is a large task. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
But I just think that, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like maybe you get into conservation or wildlife biology because you're like, oh, this is a little niche, you know, away from the world, and I'll be out in the remote environment and tracking, and this is truly what I love to do. And I'm kind of speaking on my own, you know, experiences or preferences that I had at a younger age. And then I think it's really important that our job should not end at just the publication of the paper. Like, yes, that is a lot of work, but you know, it's not just because you submitted that doesn't mean like you're going to expect that change to occur. Like you're adding more knowledge to that field, but to understand how that plays a part into the political context and landscape, I think is major, and also could influence then what you also start to research, like before your research even begins. It can impact what you decide to do. And there's obviously like limitations and boundaries. And I think that's also where scientists get this fatigue as well. You know, like they see this other truth and that no one's really listening to it. And that's where there's like frustration too. And I think in this field, you have to like really preserve your well-being, because it is like looks like a battle we cannot win in terms of preserving, you know, the natural resources on this environment for the well-being of people and animals and the landscape. It's like, God, I'm losing this battle, but to understand why things aren't happening and change isn't happening, I think could lessen our frustration collectively, and also then like fatigue as well. So it doesn't mean like, oh yeah, like this is going to solve things. I think we're so focused on solutions and solving things. But I think if we step back and say, okay, wait, I understand why this isn't happening, can help us produce like better work if we aren't as frustrated with why aren't things happening, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it feels like managing expectations is a big fucking deal with things like this. And like just being patient sometimes.
Definitely. Yeah. Because I don't think anyone is, that's the other thing is I think we're we're so divided in the States right now, and we have to realize that, you know, people that are trying to help improve these situations, even if they're operating within a system with limitations, they're probably not trying to do anything bad. I think we're like so quick to say like that person has different beliefs than me, they're like inherently bad. And I think we have this oversimplification of what bad or evil is. I think we see it as like people are doing this horrible thing and they like doing it. Well, what if they're doing this thing that's not too great, but they're also operating within a system that's perpetuating that. Yeah. And that make them like an inherently bad person. So I think once we maybe have that, you know, in mind, we can have better conversations, because I do think that a lot of conversations cannot be had with people in a room with different special interests, because we see people as like inherently bad. And maybe that's also things from society where, you know, we grow up with these movies where there's that over simplistic bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's how we kind of move through the complexities of this world, is like we gravitate towards the most simple answer, and it's not that simple, and we hate to believe that, because that actually challenges what we like grew up with and like what we believe. And I think once something is challenged of what you believe, that's scary, right? Like people want to be like, okay, this is how I think the world works, and if I get anything else that tells me things otherwise, that's horrible. That people don't like that, and I can see that makes you unsure, you know, of the world. That might not be comforting, which is why we throw on the news show that gives us the most comfort to reaffirm what we believe. And so we also do,
which is typically that there's like a good perspective and a bad perspective, and they're fighting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's not to say that there aren't like people that do bad stuff. That's not to say like, oh, you know, like, of course there's still people that do bad stuff. Like, killing people, we can all agree that's probably bad.
Yeah, sure.
But I think if we gather a more complex thought to see what we believe is just bad, we can start to see that there could actually be good in what people say or advocate that have different beliefs than us. And I kind of see that with like Republicans and Democrats too.
For sure.
You know? So I think these are important thoughts to have if we want to do anything productive together.
Yeah. You're making me think how even a question I asked earlier, like, which is sort of like an offshoot of the good guy, bad guy thing, this basic logic that we all sort of like walk through the world placing on different dramas, is like, whose fault is something? Everyone loves, like, it's so satisfying in this very like cultural way to like, oh, it's that person's fault, oh, it's their fault, because it like it explains the world in a way. And like it just seems like it's like just a bad frame with a lot of these more complex issues, whether it's bear management in the Yellowstone, which like, there's so many people trying to do things and like trying their best and failing and like whatever, or I don't know, like
and I think
defaulting on a mortgage, I don't know, like it's everything, it's
right,
like, whose fault is what this?
And if I could imagine a more productive conversation between a photographer and an agency personnel, if one of those people came in and actually stated their ownership of the problem and then proceeded with, okay, but this is my opinion, but in the beginning stated their ownership, like, I know we're contributing to this, or I am aware of this, I think that would give that person much more credibility and almost offering up an olive branch than to say like, I'm amazing, I don't hunt this animal, that makes me a good person, like you're doing bad stuff, like, and finding fault. I think that could definitely be a more productive conversation, because whenever I have interviewed people on this case, they're always like, well, it's because this agency or this person's doing so-and-so and they're doing so-and-so. And people are rare to say, we're all part of this problem. We humans are doing this. And let's start the conversation on that foot than pointing fingers. Because as soon as you point fingers, that, team of people, they just got to go on the defense mode. And so, I mean, that's what I was saying about ownership of the problem.
Yeah. Tight.